The models we've presented so far in the chapter have certain implicit assumptions that we haven't yet empirically investigated. So starting at this point in the chapter, on page 239 for the next couple of pages, Sedivy evaluates those assumptions. One of them is that we have representations of whole words somewhere in our brain. This is a very useful assumption because it makes the most intuitive sense to us. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how words are actually stored in the brain. So let's move on to page 242, and we'll look at the different possibilities of how this might actually be. There's two models here, the localist and the distributed models. So the localist is demonstrated in panel A, where the phonetic sounds k, at combine to activate the word cat. And the word cat, in turn, activates certain concepts that are related to a cat. For instance, that it catches mice, has fur, etc. Those concepts are activated because the word cat as a whole unit was activated. But that doesn't necessarily, that's not necessarily the only possibility. In panel B, we see the model of the distributed representations. This model is less intuitive and a little bit difficult to describe, but it can account for some data better. For instance, when the phonetic sounds k, at are activated, it does not activate a word cat as a whole unit. Instead, those sounds combine together and simultaneously activate different concepts that are related to cats. And the whole word cat is not held in our memory as like a word unit, but rather that these phonetic sounds combine to make as a whole activated unit. So I wish I could draw around here, but with your finger, take your finger and draw a circle around the phonetic sounds k, at there. As a whole unit, those three phonetic sounds together are at the same time being activated at the same time, are causing a whole, they're like creating something out of nothing. They're creating a unit where there isn't actually a unit of a word. And together they're activating the representations of those concepts that are related to a cat. Now you can see that those concepts that are most related to a cat are a dark orange, but that some that weren't activated in panel A are activated here. For instance, you see the lighter yellow or the lighter orange is activated in is worn and has scales. That's because certain phonetic sounds can combine together to lead us in a direction in much the same way that we saw back on page 239. Back onto page 239, different phonetic sounds like b, e by themselves had begun to activate the word beat, but once we heard the last phonetic sound when we heard the m, then the word beat was inhibited. So in this case, we would see that some of the phonetic sounds being said in the word k, at have partially activated things like is worn or has scales, even though a cat isn't worn and it doesn't have scales. Those sounds could have been completed in a different way, in a different word, that may have activated more strongly those concepts. Now, the strength of this latter model, even though it's far less intuitive and difficult to describe, is that it can better account for individuals who have had seizures. People who have had seizures seem to have damage to all of their word representations. It's not that like a subset of their vocabulary seems to have disappeared, but rather they seem to struggle to be able to say and retrieve any word in their vocabulary, suggesting that they have like damage to parts of every word. So this distributed model seems to be able to account for that data better, but its weakness is that it can't be used in describing whole word units.